Mass society is a society that caters to the needs of the majority of the population, the lower classes. During this time, about 80% of Europeans were considered members of this class, which included agricultural workers, urban laborers, and skilled artisans. When a society pays attention to the masses, their living standards go up. Mass leisure is simply any leisure activity that appeals to the majority of the people in a society. Modern examples of this would be going to the beach or to the movies. For the most part, the changes spurred on by the Second Industrial Revolution led to the emergence of a mass society. With extra money to spend, department stores popped up in cities. At this point in history, malls didn't exist, and shopping was restricted to needed items such as cooking utensils. The department store ushered in a whole new age of consumerism. These huge stores offered clothes for men, women, and children, furniture, and much more. In the 1880s and 1890s, new work opportunities, shorter work hours, a rise in wages, and a decline in the cost of products allowed many people to look to recreational activities during their time off. What kinds of activities did people enjoy? Well, it turns out many of the same ones we enjoy today. During this time, music and dance halls were very popular. Although they were very different than the clubs of today, the basic idea of young people socializing through music and dancing was there. Another popular form of entertainment was watching team sports such as baseball, football, and rugby. While sports were not new, they began to be more organized during this time with rules and regulations. Team sports eventually became the professional organizations we recognize today, and players were adored like movie stars. Again, gender differences kept women out of sports considered too physical. They were usually only permitted to participate in sports such as croquet. There were instances of women breaking this barrier by playing in organizations such as the Women's Football Club. People frequented amusement parks and went on vacations to beach destinations as well. Beginning in 1850, the health of many Europeans improved greatly. Urban reformers spotlighted many societal ills such as unsanitary cities and unregulated food. Public awareness of these problems led to many changes that increased the population of Europe. For instance, in the years between 1850 and 1910, the European population rose from 270 million to 460 million. One of the main reasons for this dramatic change was new vaccinations. At the end of the 19th century, vaccines for typhoid fever, the bubonic plague, rabies, cholera, and tetanus were introduced. By the early decades of the 20th century, vaccines for yellow and scarlet fever, tuberculosis, and others were made. These advancements in medicine saved the lives of countless people and caused a substantial decline in mortality rates. Along with mass society came mass education, or the availability of education to a majority of the population. It may surprise some to know that in the beginning of the 19th century, most states did not provide or even require education for children. In fact, education was still a privilege of the wealthy. This all began to change in the 1870s, when many states took control of education. Countries established education for both boys and girls between the ages of 6 and 13. Within the next few decades, many European countries had established free public education and teacher training. Why this new commitment to education? Well, historians believe it was a combination of things, like a genuine belief in the value of knowledge, a need for skilled workers to run the factory machines, and the need for educated voters. However, education was not equal. During the early years of public education, different subjects were taught to boys and girls. For instance, typically girls had little instruction in math and science and focused mostly on learning domestic skills, such as sewing and cooking. However, the demand for teachers did create opportunities for women. In fact, since teaching was considered a form of nurturing, it was considered an acceptable extension of women's role as caregiver of the household. Some of the first college opportunities for young women occurred at schools set up to train teachers. Another social advancement occurred in the fight for women's suffrage, or women's right to vote. The movement for women's suffrage really became a political issue in the 1840s and 1850s. In Britain, women's movements were in agreement about the importance of gaining this right, but were divided over how best to accomplish their goals. The two prominent groups that emerged were the Liberals under the leadership of Millicent Fawcett and the Radical group led by Emmeline Pankhurst. While Fawcett advocated peaceful tactics such as demonstrations, Pankhurst's group engaged in more militant work such as chaining themselves to lampposts, vandalizing stores, and throwing eggs at members of the government. They were frequently arrested. A small number of states granted women the right to vote before 1914. However, many had to wait until the end of World War I, when women's contributions cemented their place as citizens. Let's review. The society of the late 19th century changed in many ways. It was at this point that a mass society emerged where the needs of the majority were considered. New opportunities for work, shorter hours, and more spending money gave people extra funds and time. This spurred the development of mass leisure and led to dance and music halls, amusement parks, team sports, and family vacations. The emergence of the large department store made shopping a social event. The overall health of the public improved with vaccines for diseases like typhoid fever, cholera, and others, causing a population spike. The fight for women's suffrage became a strong political point in the late 19th century. Led by militants like Emmeline Pankhurst and less radical women like Millicent Fawcett, the suffrage movement was the first step in equality for many women.